Every species that has ever left its homeworld has told itself the same story at least once. We are the strongest thing out here. Sometimes it's true for a while, sometimes it's true for centuries, and sometimes, if a species is very lucky or very unlucky depending on how you look at it, something finally arrives to correct the math. This is the story of the day humanity did the math wrong. Admiral Reyes had spent his entire career believing one simple fact about the galaxy. Humanity was, without serious competition, the deadliest thing in it. It wasn't arrogance. It was arithmetic. In the 90 years since Earth's first jump drive test, humanity had fought and won 6 interstellar conflicts against 5 different species, expanded across 40 systems, and built a fleet, the Sol Combined Navy, that could level a planet's crust in under an hour if the order came down. Every alien power humanity had encountered so far had either allied with Earth out of self-interest or been quietly, efficiently absorbed into its sphere of influence. Humans had a saying for it, half joke and half doctrine, printed on recruitment posters across a dozen colony worlds. We didn't come to the stars to make friends. It was stitched onto flight jackets. It was etched above the main hangar bay doors on every carrier in the fleet. Reyes had said it himself more than once to cadets fresh out of the academy, standing a little too straight, trying too hard not to look afraid of the black outside the viewport. He believed it. That was the thing people forgot about men like Reyes. It wasn't performance. He genuinely, completely believed it, the way a man believes gravity will keep his feet on the floor. So when the deep-range sensor arrays at the edge of the Perseus frontier picked up a signal, not a transmission, not a ship, but something the analysts could only describe as a gravitational signature the size of a small moon, stationary, for at least 11,000 years. Reyes did not hesitate. He took the Third Fleet to go introduce themselves. 31 warships, 12,000 personnel. Enough firepower on paper to end 3 separate wars simultaneously. He brought all of it to say hello. Part 1. The object. The jump out to Perseus space took 11 days, and for most of the fleet it was routine. Drills, maintenance rotations, the low hum of 12,000 people going about the business of being very far from home. Lieutenant Elias Vance spent most of it running tactical simulations he already knew. Deep down, wouldn't matter. Commander Priya Anand spent most of it awake, running spectral analysis on a signal that refused to resolve into anything her models recognized. On the 12th day, they arrived. The thing hanging in the dark at the edge of Perseus space did not look like a ship, a station, or a weapon. It looked, if anything, like a single black seed, roughly 9 kilometers long, its surface unmarked by any visible seam, engine, or weapon port. It emitted no heat. It reflected no light except what fell directly on it. Every scan the Third Fleet Science Division ran came back with the same maddening result. Composition unknown, structure unknown, purpose unknown. Could be a relic, said Commander Priya Anand, the fleet's chief science officer, staring at the object through the bridge's forward display. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. She kept flexing her fingers against the edge of the console, an old habit from academy days that surfaced whenever her instruments told her something her training hadn't prepared her for. Dead installation. Something left behind by a species that isn't around to claim it anymore. Or it's occupied, and it just doesn't care that we're here, said Lieutenant Elias Vance, standing at the tactical station, arms crossed. He was young for his rank, 29, sharp, and one of the few officers on the bridge who had voted quietly against Reyes's decision to bring 3 full battle groups instead of a single survey ship. He'd lost that argument in a briefing room 6 weeks ago. He hadn't stopped thinking about it since. If it's occupied, Reyes said, then it should be very interested in the fact that 31 warships just entered its front yard. Sir, Anand said carefully, with respect, that's exactly the kind of thinking that got the Draymar Concorde wiped out. Reyes didn't look away from the view screen. The Draymar Concorde got wiped out because they picked a fight with us. I don't intend to pick a fight with anyone. I intend to establish contact, assess capability, and report back. He allowed himself a small, confident smile. We've never met anything out here we couldn't handle, Commander. I don't expect today to be different. Behind him, a junior sensor tech named Okafor, 22 years old, 3 months out of the academy on his first deep space posting, quietly, nervously raised his hand like he was still in a classroom. Sir, Okafor said, the object isn't just old. Our dating models are putting the surface weathering pattern at 11,000 years, but there's no micrometeorite scarring consistent with that age. Whatever this is, it's either been actively maintained this entire time, or nothing in this sector has been allowed to touch it in 11,000 years. The bridge went quiet for a beat too long. Noted, Reyes said. Keep scanning. He would remember that sentence. We've never met anything out here we couldn't handle. Later, as the last thing he said before the universe corrected him. Contact came 4 hours after the fleet settled into formation at what Reyes's tactical officers considered a respectful distance of 200,000 kilometers. 4 hours in which the crew ran drills, refreshed coffee they didn't finish, and tried not to stare too long at the black shape sitting motionless on every view screen. There was no hail, no transmission, no warning of any kind. Every screen on every ship in the Third Fleet, simultaneously, went dark for exactly 1 second, then displayed the same image. A single, simple geometric shape. A circle inscribed inside a triangle inscribed inside a square, rendered in soft blue light, accompanied by no sound at all. Report, Reyes snapped, already moving toward the command chair. Sir, that wasn't a transmission we received, said the fleet's communications officer, voice tight with something close to panic. There's no signal source, no transmission log. It just appeared. On every screen, on every ship, simultaneously. Across a 200,000-kilometer formation with zero latency. Zero latency, across that distance, was not merely fast. It was a violation of the basic physics every officer on that bridge had spent their careers assuming was non-negotiable. Light itself needed the better part of a second to cross that gap. Whatever had just spoken hadn't used light at all. Instantaneous communication, Anand said slowly, staring at the shape still glowing on the screen. Sir, if that's what just happened, that object didn't just send us a message. It sent us a message using physics we don't have a name for. Reyes felt, for the first time in a long career, a small and unfamiliar cold spot settle in his chest. He didn't let it show. That, too, was training. Send a formal greeting, he said. Standard first contact protocol. Tell them we come in peace and request dialogue. The greeting was transmitted. No response came for 11 minutes. 11 minutes that felt, to everyone on that bridge, considerably longer, the silence stretching out until junior officers started glancing at each other instead of their consoles. Then, without warning, every weapon system across all 31 ships of the Third Fleet went dark simultaneously. Not damaged, not disabled by any detectable attack, simply off, as though someone had reached into each ship individually and turned a switch that human engineers hadn't known existed. Sir, the tactical officer nearly shouted. Weapons are down fleet-wide. I have no cause. There's no attack signature, no intrusion, nothing in the logs. They're just offline. Engines? Reyes demanded. Engines are green, sir. Life support green. Just weapons. Reyes stared at the object on the view screen. Still silent, still unmarked, still radiating absolutely nothing that human sensors could interpret as intent, and understood, with the particular clarity of a man watching his entire worldview quietly rearrange itself, that whatever was inside that 9-kilometer shape had just disarmed an entire war fleet from 200,000 kilometers away, without firing a single shot, seemingly as an afterthought. It had not been a threat. It had not felt in the moment like an attack at all. It had felt like a parent gently taking a knife out of a child's hand. Hanky, before we go any further into what's waiting for the Third Fleet out there in the dark, quick word. If you're enjoying this story, this channel is built entirely around this exact kind of content. Humanity getting humbled, humanity getting glorious, first contact stories that don't take the easy way out. New stories drop every week. So if you don't want to miss the next one, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you actually get notified when it goes live. And if this story's hitting the way it's supposed to, the wonder, the dread, that cold spot in the chest feeling, do me a favor and drop a like. It genuinely helps push these stories out to more people who'd enjoy them, and it takes about 1 second. Comment down below too. I want to know who you think is right. Reyes or Vance? Was bringing the whole fleet a mistake? Or was it exactly what saved them? All right. Back to Perseus space. It's about to get a lot stranger. Part 2. The voice that wasn't a voice. The second contact came not through the ship's speakers, but directly into the minds of every crew member simultaneously. A sensation Commander Anand would later struggle for weeks to describe accurately in her official report, settling eventually on the phrase like remembering something you never learned. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even, strictly, a sound. It was more like a thought arriving fully formed, already fluent in a language it had no business knowing, already carrying the exact cadence and warmth of a native speaker who had simply never needed a mouth. We apologize for the disarmament, the presence said. In perfect, unaccented standard English, though said implied a voice, and this had none. Weapons are unnecessary here, and their presence made several of our observation systems uncomfortable. We have restored your propulsion and life support fully. You are not in danger. Reyes forced his voice to stay level. What are we speaking with? We do not have a name that would translate meaningfully into your language, the presence replied. Your species has, in recent millennia, referred to structures like this one as watchtowers. That is close enough. Recent millennia, Anand repeated quietly. Sir, they said recent. Your species is young, the presence continued without any detectable malice, the way one might state that water was wet. Your jump drive technology is approximately 400,000 years behind current galactic standard. Your weapon systems, while impressive by the metrics of your own development, would not meaningfully inconvenience a single one of our maintenance drones. The bridge went very quiet. Somewhere behind Reyes, young Okafor had gone pale and very still, his hand frozen over a console he'd forgotten he was touching. That's not possible, Reyes said, and heard even as he said it how thin the word sounded. We've fought 6 wars. We've never lost to anything out here. You have fought 6 wars against species at a comparable stage of development to your own, the presence said. We do not consider that evidence of exceptional strength. We consider it evidence that you have, so far, only met your immediate neighbors. Lieutenant Vance, still at his now useless tactical station, found his voice before Reyes did. Then what are you? If you're not comparable to us at all, why haven't you done anything to us? Why let us keep expanding, keep fighting, keep believing we were the strongest thing out here? There was a pause. The first pause in the exchange that felt, to everyone on the bridge, genuinely considered rather than instantaneous, as though something vast had actually stopped to choose its next words with care. Because we have learned across a very long span of time that young species require the experience of believing themselves powerful before they can survive the experience of learning they are not, the presence said. We have watched approximately 140 civilizations reach the point your species currently occupies. 61 of them collapsed entirely upon learning the true scale of what exists beyond their borders. We did not want your species to be the 62nd. Reyes sat down slowly in the command chair, the confident architecture of his entire career quietly folding in on itself. You've been watching us, he said. For how long? Since before your species domesticated fire, the presence replied, without weight, without pride, simply fact. We were present for what your historians call the first agricultural revolution. We observed your first written language develop independently in 4 separate regions of your homeworld. We have watched your 6 interstellar wars with considerable interest, and, if it is of any comfort, some genuine concern for the well-being of your species. Anand's hands were shaking slightly as she gripped the edge of her console. Why show yourself now? Why not just keep watching? Because your fleet crossed a boundary, the presence said, and for the first time something in its tone shifted. Not hostile, but weighted, the way a teacher's voice changes when a lesson is about to matter. Not a physical boundary, a developmental one. Your species has, within the last decade, begun constructing weapons capable of unmaking entire star systems, justified by the belief that no force in this galaxy could meaningfully oppose you if you chose to use them. That belief, left uncorrected, tends to end civilizations. We intervened before it could end yours. For a long moment, nobody on the bridge spoke. Somewhere in the silence, Reyes became aware of his own pulse, loud in his ears, in a way it hadn't been since his first combat command 30 years earlier. "You said 61 collapsed," Vance said quietly. "What happened to the other 79? "They listened," the Presence said simply. "That is all it ever takes. Not surrender, not obedience. Simply the willingness to be told something true. At the moment, it can still change what happens next." Anand exchanged a glance with Reyes, a glance that carried in half a second the weight of every assumption both of them had built their careers on, quietly cracking down the middle. "Can you show us?" she asked. "Not tell us. Show us. What happens to the ones who don't listen?" Another pause. This one different, almost gentle, the way a parent pauses before deciding a child is finally old enough for a hard truth. "Yes," the Presence said. "We were hoping you would ask." Part 3. The lesson. What happened next would later be referred to, in the sanitized language of official Earth Assembly records, as the Perseus demonstration. Every human aboard the Third Fleet who witnessed it firsthand would use a very different word in private for the rest of their lives: the correction. Without any further announcement, the 9-kilometer object unfolded, not mechanically, not with visible moving parts, but the way a flower opens in accelerated film, revealing an interior that defied every principle of structural engineering human science understood. Light bloomed outward from inside it, not harsh, not blinding, but soft and layered, like looking down into water lit from beneath. Inside, suspended in a lattice of that soft light, was what the Presence called simply an archive, a compressed, living record of every civilization the Watchtower species had observed across what Anand's stunned calculations later placed at roughly 200 million years of continuous documentation. 200 million years. Reyes tried and failed to hold the number in his head. Human civilization, in its entirety, was younger than a single rounding error in that figure. "We are going to show you something," the Presence said. Not as a threat, as context. What followed was not a vision exactly, nor quite a memory. Every human aboard the Third Fleet experienced it simultaneously, and every account of it afterward differed slightly in detail, but agreed entirely in substance. They saw, compressed into what felt like minutes but registered on ships' chronometers as exactly 4 seconds, the rise and fall of civilization after civilization, species that had built empires spanning thousands of star systems, weapons capable of extinguishing suns, philosophies more sophisticated than anything humanity had yet produced. And then, one after another, the quiet, inevitable collapse that followed the moment each civilization convinced itself it had become untouchable. They saw a species called, in translation, the Ven Ascendancy, 3 million years extinct, who had built a weapon capable of collapsing a star into a black hole, used it once to end a rival civilization, and then spent the next 4,000 years slowly, methodically destroying themselves in the paranoia of believing every remaining species in the galaxy now had reason to fear and hunt them. Anand would later write, in the margins of her personal notes rather than her official report, that the last thing she saw of the Ven was not a battle but an empty capital city, its light still burning for no one, its last message to the stars an automated broadcast nobody had thought to turn off. They saw a species that had achieved what their own scientists called post-scarcity utopia. Every material need answered instantly, scarcity itself engineered out of existence, only to collapse within 2 centuries once their citizens, freed from every material need, discovered they had built nothing left worth living for. Entire generations were born, lived, and died, having never once needed to strive for anything, and the species simply, quietly, stopped choosing to continue itself, They saw a third species, smaller, gentler, one the presence called only the Wardens of the Long Coast, who had done everything right by every metric humanity understood: cooperative, curious, non-expansionist, careful. They had been erased anyway, not by war but by a stellar event no early warning system could have caught in time. And the vision lingered there just long enough for every human watching to understand, with sudden and uncomfortable clarity, that survival was never guaranteed even to the wise. It was only ever made more likely. And then, near the very end of the compressed vision, they saw humanity's own recent history. The Third Fleet itself, 31 warships moving with absolute confidence toward an object 9 kilometers long that could have erased them without effort, entirely convinced, right up until the last possible moment, that their strength made them safe. Reyes watched himself, from an angle no camera on any of his ships could have captured, standing on his own bridge and saying, "We've never met anything out here we couldn't handle." He heard it land differently the second time. The vision ended. The bridge crew stood in silence that had a physical weight to it, the kind of silence that follows a very large door closing somewhere far away. "You're not showing us this to frighten us," Anand said finally, her voice hoarse. "No," the presence replied. "We are showing you this because you are, by the metrics that matter to civilizations at your stage, remarkably young and remarkably capable, and we would prefer that your species survive long enough to become something more than merely dangerous." Vance, who had been silent for almost a full minute, finally spoke, and his voice carried none of the tactical certainty he'd built his career on. "The 79 who listened, what did they become?" "Varied," the presence said. "Some became quiet. Some became extraordinary. One became in time something close to what we are now. Old enough, patient enough, to watch others the way we watch you. What they had in common was smaller than you might expect. They simply stopped mistaking the size of their weapons for the size of their wisdom." Reyes stood slowly from the command chair, and for the first time in his career he did not know what to say. "What do you want from us?" he asked quietly. "What happens now?" "Nothing you are not already capable of choosing yourselves," the presence said. "We do not conquer. We do not rule. We have, across 200 million years, learned that the only lasting thing any species can offer another is information, delivered honestly. At the moment, it can actually be heard." A pause. "Your species has spent 90 years believing strength was the only currency that mattered in this galaxy. We would ask you to consider, simply, that strength without humility has ended every civilization we have ever recorded, without exception. You are not the exception either, but you are, currently, still early enough to choose differently." Nobody on that bridge spoke for a long time after that. Even the ship itself seemed quieter, the low background hum of engines and life support somehow more noticeable now that the 200 million years of silence pressing in around them had made itself known. Interlude. The other 30 ships. History, when it is written down, tends to remember only the bridge of the flagship. It forgets that 30 other ships, carrying most of those 12,000 souls, experienced the exact same 6 weeks from the inside of their own hulls, with no admiral's chair to sit in and no council chamber waiting for them at the end of it. Aboard the destroyer Meridian, a maintenance chief named Osei spent the 6-week return voyage doing something she'd never admit to in an official log, talking to the empty engine room late at night, quietly, the way people talk to a church when no one else is inside it. She wasn't religious, not in any way the assembly recognized. But something about watching her weapon systems go dark without a single alarm tripping. Something about knowing, with total certainty, that whatever had reached into her ship had done it as casually as a person turning off a lamp. Had rearranged something in her she didn't yet have words for. Aboard the carrier Windrose, a group of off-duty pilots gathered in a mess hall that had gone unusually quiet for 6 straight weeks, running the same 4 seconds of compressed vision over and over in conversation, each person remembering some detail the others hadn't. One had seen, in the Ven Ascendancy's final years, a single lit window in an otherwise dark city. Another had seen nothing of the kind, and instead remembered, vividly, the exact sound, if it could be called a sound, of the post-scarcity species falling silent, generation by generation, like a radio losing signal one station at a time. No two accounts matched exactly. All of them agreed on how it had felt, like being shown gently a mirror they hadn't asked for. And aboard the science vessel Halcyon, trailing at the rear of the formation, a junior xenolinguist assigned there entirely by coincidence spent the return voyage trying to build a translation framework for a species that hadn't used words at all. She would fail officially. Her failed notes would become unofficially the foundation of an entire academic field within a decade. None of this made it into Reyes's report to the council. It didn't need to. The change that mattered wasn't happening in the chamber where councilwomen asked pointed questions about obsolete doctrine. It was happening quietly, in mess halls and engine rooms in the small hours of a 6-week voyage home, in 12,000 people who had each, individually, been shown the same quiet, enormous thing, and had each individually started becoming someone slightly different because of it. That, Anand would later write, was the part the Watchtower had understood better than humanity ever had. You cannot force a civilization to become wiser. You can only show it the truth, clearly enough, gently enough, and then simply wait to see what it chooses to do with the rest of the voyage home. Part 4. The Return. The Third Fleet returned to Sol space 6 weeks later, weapons fully restored, ships entirely undamaged, and every officer aboard fundamentally changed in ways the Earth Assembly's psychological evaluation teams would spend years trying to properly document. Junior sensor tech Okafor, 22 years old and 3 months out of the academy when the fleet first arrived at Perseus, would later request a transfer, not away from deep space, but toward it, spending the rest of his career specializing in first contact protocol, driven by a need to understand rather than a need to prove anything. Admiral Reyes gave his official report to the Assembly Council in person, standing in a chamber that had heard over 90 years countless briefings on humanity's military triumphs and territorial expansion. This briefing was different, and everyone in the room could feel it before he'd said a single word. He stood a little less straight than usual. He didn't reach for the podium's edge the way he normally did when he wanted to project certainty. He simply stood and spoke. We went to the Perseus frontier believing we were about to make first contact with a new rival, Reyes said. We were wrong about the word rival. There is no rivalry between our species and what we encountered. There isn't a comparison that makes sense at all. Admiral, said Councilwoman Idris Okwosa, leaning forward, are you telling this council that Earth's military has just been rendered obsolete? I'm telling this council, Reyes said, that our military was never as significant as we believed it to be, and the only reason we're standing in this room today, rather than a smoking debris field, is that the species we encountered chose mercy over correction. He paused. They've been watching us since before we discovered fire, Councilwoman. They watched 60 other species destroy themselves the same way we were about to. They stepped in specifically to stop that from happening to us. The chamber sat in a silence that felt, for the first time in 90 years of triumphant briefings, appropriately humbled. What do they want from us? Okwosa asked finally. Nothing, Reyes said. That's the part I'm still struggling with, Councilwoman. They want nothing from us at all except that we survive long enough to stop needing to be watched. A younger councilman near the back, new to his seat, still unused to the weight of the chamber, asked the question that would end up months later, printed on the front page of every major Earth news network. Admiral, if they're that far beyond us, what's stopping them from simply deciding one day that we're not worth the patience? Reyes was quiet for a moment before he answered. Nothing, he said honestly. Nothing at all, which is exactly why I don't think fear is the right response to what happened out there, Councilman. I think humility is. They've had 200 million years of reasons to stop being patient with young, loud, overconfident species. They haven't yet. I'd rather we spend our time deserving that patience than testing how far it extends. After the formal session ended, Reyes lingered in the empty chamber longer than protocol required, staring up at the old assembly seal mounted above the councilwomen's dais, a stylized image of Earth wreathed in stars, with the motto, Ad Astra, per fortitudinem etched beneath it. To the stars, through strength. He had walked past that seal 1,000 times in his career and never once questioned it. He questioned it now. A junior aide found him there 20 minutes later, still standing, still looking up. "Admiral, is everything all right?" Reyes didn't answer right away. "Do you know what the Watchtower told us when we asked what they wanted from us?" "No, sir." "Nothing." Reyes finally looked away from the seal. 200 million years of watching, and the only thing they asked of us was that we survive long enough to need less watching. I spent 90 years, my whole career, believing strength was the point. Turns out it was never the point. It was just the thing that bought us enough time to eventually learn what the point actually was. He shook his head slowly. "I'm 61 years old, and I only just found that out." He requested quietly that the old motto be reviewed. It took the Assembly Council 4 years of debate to agree on a replacement, and when they finally did, the new phrase, carved beneath the same stylized earth, on the same dais in the same chamber, read simply, "Ad astra per sapientiam." To the stars through wisdom. Reyes did not live to see the unveiling. He retired 18 months after Perseus, spent his remaining years teaching first contact ethics at the same academy that had once taught him to believe humanity had nothing left to learn from the galaxy, and made a point every single year of ending his first lecture to incoming cadets with the same story. Not a story about weapons going dark, not really. A story about a species patient enough to correct a mistake instead of punishing it. "You will meet things out there," he would tell each new class, "that make you feel for the first time in your life, very small. When that happens, and it will happen, I want you to remember that feeling small is not the same as being in danger. Sometimes it is simply the universe finally being honest with you. The trick is learning to be grateful for the honesty instead of afraid of it." In the months that followed, something quietly fundamentally shifted in humanity's relationship with the stars. The Seoul Combined Navy's doctrine documents were rewritten from the ground up, no longer built around the assumption of unmatched supremacy, but around a phrase that began appearing in official communications, coined by Commander Priya Anand, in a report that would eventually be taught in every assembly military academy for a generation. "We were the loudest room in a very quiet house, and we never once thought to ask who else was home. The old recruitment posters, 'We didn't come to the stars to make friends,' were quietly retired. Nobody issued an order to take them down. They simply stopped being reprinted, and within 2 years, a new generation of cadets grew up without ever having seen them, learning the Perseus encounter instead as the founding lesson of their training. Strength is not evidence of safety, and confidence is not the same thing as understanding." Commander Priya Anand left the Seoul Combined Navy 18 months after Perseus and founded the Assembly's first office of xenological humility, a name that drew open mockery in its first year and quiet respect by its fifth, once its early recommendations began preventing exactly the kind of overconfident first contact incidents that had nearly ended the Third Fleet. Lieutenant Elias Vance, promoted to commander in the aftermath of the Perseus encounter, would spend the rest of his career leading humanity's first genuine diplomatic, rather than expansionist, missions to neighboring species, carrying with him always a simple rule he'd adopted from those 4 seconds of compressed history. Ask before you assume you already understand the room you're standing in. He kept, on his desk for the rest of his career, a small printed image of the circle inscribed inside a triangle inscribed inside a square, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Young Okafor, the sensor tech who had once nervously raised his hand about micrometeorite scarring, would go on to author the Assembly's standard first contact sensor protocol, still in use decades later, still opening with the same line he'd insisted on including against the objections of 3 separate review boards. Assume you are being watched by something patient enough not to need to introduce itself. Behave accordingly. The Watchtower, as humanity came to call it, remained at the edge of Perseus space, silent and unmarked as it had always been, occasionally offering brief, precise answers to questions humanity's scientists were finally humble enough to ask, instead of simply assuming they already knew. No further weapons were ever disarmed. No further demonstrations were ever needed. Humanity, it turned out, only needed to be corrected once, provided the correction was delivered with enough patience and enough mercy to actually be heard. A small research outpost was eventually established a respectful distance from the object, not to study it exactly, since every instrument humanity possessed remained functionally useless against its architecture, but simply to be near it, the way a student might choose to sit close to a teacher whose lessons hadn't finished yet. The outpost's rotating staff, drawn entirely from volunteers, kept a tradition that began informally and eventually became official policy. Every new arrival on their first night was required to sit alone in the observation dome facing the Watchtower and simply watch it for 1 hour in silence before being allowed to begin any official duties. Nobody had ordered this. Nobody could quite explain why it mattered. But every person who did it came away agreeing on one thing: that an hour spent in genuine, wordless attention towards something vastly older and vastly wiser than yourself did something to a person that no briefing document ever could. It was, several outpost commanders noted in their logs over the years, the closest thing humanity had ever built to a formal practice of humility. Decades later, when the first genuinely dangerous crisis arrived, a real one, not a lesson, a rogue AI collective from a species humanity had never before encountered, moving through the outer colonies with genuinely hostile intent, it was Commander Vance, gray-haired by then and leading the Assembly's diplomatic corps, who insisted the fleet be held back and negotiation attempted first, over the objections of officers who still remembered the old doctrine and wanted blood. It was a risk. It could have failed. It didn't. And in his own report afterward, Vance wrote only one line by way of explanation for his decision, a line that would outlive him in assembly training manuals for a generation. "I once watched an entire fleet's weapons go dark, because something wiser than us decided restraint mattered more than the point we thought we needed to prove. I have never forgotten how much that decision cost them, and how little it cost us. No fleet was ever sent back to it with weapons. Humanity had, for the first time in 90 years, learned the difference between confidence and understanding, and the difference, it turned out, had been the only thing standing between them and becoming the 60-second civilization on a very long, very quiet list. Somewhere out past Perseus, the Watchtower is still there, still silent, still watching, and maybe that's the part of this story worth sitting with. Not the fleet, not the Admiral, not even the moment the weapons went dark. It's the idea that somewhere out in the quiet, something ancient enough to have watched 140 civilizations rise and fall looked at a loud, young, overconfident species and decided they were worth the patience. The question this story leaves behind isn't, are we alone? It's this: if something out there has been watching us the whole time, waiting to see what we do with our strength, what would they see right now if they were watching today?